Not every day unfolds as planned. Take, for instance, the incredible moment when a mother bear, rather than attacking in fear or anger, expressed what seemed like gratitude toward a young woman who had saved her crying cub. Elisa was on her final height before starting basic training for the military. Living in the mountains had taught her resilience, and she believed that this would give her an edge in the demanding training to come. But as she climbed deeper into the hills that day, her peaceful trek was shattered by a heart-wrenching cry, something she had never heard before in all her years in the wilderness. The sound wasn't human, but it was just as desperate. As she approached the source of the commotion, she found a bear cub stranded on a ledge, halfway down a steep rock face. Its tiny body was trembling, its cries calling out in vain for its mother. Elisa's heart sank as she spotted the mother bear high above, frantically pacing. Each attempt to descend sent more rocks tumbling toward her helpless cub. The cub, frightened and injured, was trapped in a situation it couldn't escape on its own, and time was running out. For most people, this would be a moment to retreat, to leave nature's course unchallenged. But Elisa wasn't like most people. With no gear other than a rope in her backpack and her years of climbing experience, she made the bold decision to act. She quickly tied off the rope, knowing the danger of approaching a cub, especially with the mother nearby. Bears can be fiercely protective, and a wrong move could spell disaster. The climb down was perilous. The cliff face offered few handholds, and Elisa's feet slipped more than once. Every movement sent a jolt of fear through her, but she knew that both her life and the cub's depended on her maintaining her composure. When she finally reached the ledge, her heart was racing, not from the exertion, but from the uncertainty of what might happen next. The cub, still terrified, initially flinched at her approach. But Elisa spoke softly, her voice calm and reassuring. She could see the cub's paw was stuck in a crack, and after carefully wrapping the rope around his small body to prevent a fall, she worked to free him. With gentle precision, she managed to twist the paw free. Though the cub whimpered, it was still intact, save for a few lost patches of fur. Now came the hardest part. With the cub safely tied to the rope, Elisa slowly lowered him to the ground below. It took every ounce of strength and concentration to keep the rope steady, her arms burning as she released the line inch by inch. But once the cub was on solid ground, she wasn't done yet. Exhausted, she still had to climb down herself, a feat that, in her depleted state, seemed almost impossible. As she descended, her muscles screamed in protest, and her mind raced. She knew that a misstep could mean a deadly fall, but quitting wasn't an option. When she finally touched the ground, the overwhelming relief brought tears to her eyes. The cub, now safe, nudged her with a playful curiosity, oblivious to the danger he had just been rescued from. But the real test came when the mother bear emerged from the trees. Elisa froze. The enormous animal approached, her eyes fixed on her cub. The fear that had built up in Elisa's chest threatened to choke her. Would the mother see her as a threat, despite her efforts to help? To Elisa's amazement, the bear did something completely unexpected. Instead of attacking, the mother bear sniffed the air, briefly made eye contact with Elisa, then turned her attention to her cub. They embraced, nuzzling each other in a display of affection that left Elisa speechless. It was as if, in that fleeting moment, the bear understood what Elisa had done for her child. Even more surprising, the mother bear didn't leave right away. She circled back toward Elisa, and to her astonishment, picked up Elisa's discarded backpack in her mouth, gently placing it beside her before retreating into the forest with her cub. Elisa could hardly believe what she had witnessed. It was a gesture that transcended species, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, from a wild animal to the young woman who had saved her child. As Elisa lay on the ground, catching her breath, she reflected on the significance of what had just happened. The wilderness had taught her many lessons, but none as profound as the one she had learned that day. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's found in the quiet resolve to do what's right, even when fear and doubt loom large. This encounter stayed with Elisa through her basic training and beyond. Whenever she faced fear or uncertainty, she thought of that day on the cliff, when her decision to act, despite the risks, had saved a life. Years later, when she returned to those same mountains, she thought she spotted the bear, now fully grown, standing tall in the distance. She couldn't be certain, but as their eyes met across the expanse, she felt a familiar connection, one born out of trust, bravery, and an unforgettable bond. In that moment, Elisa knew she had made a difference, not just in the life of a bear cub, but in her own understanding of courage, compassion, and the powerful ways in which our actions ripple across the world. As Elisa stood there in the fading light of the mountain, watching the grown bear from a distance, a flood of memories washed over her. She couldn't be sure if it was the same cub she had rescued all those years ago, but something in the bear's calm demeanor and the way their eyes locked made her heart stir. There was no fear, no apprehension, only a quiet recognition between them. It felt like a reunion, an unspoken connection that transcended time and species. A bond forged on the cliffside that day, when she had risked everything to save him. She smiled, her heart swelling with the realization of how much had changed since that fateful day. The once helpless cub was now a strong, independent creature, roaming the wilderness with the same confidence Elisa had hoped to find in herself back then. She had gone through her basic training, faced challenges that tested her to her core, and even experienced the intensity of combat. But every time fear or exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the cliff, the cub, and the way she had pushed through her limits that day. As the years passed, Elisa carried that experience as a talisman, a reminder of her own strength. It wasn't just about the physical act of saving the cub. It was about what she had discovered within herself. The courage to act in the face of uncertainty, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and the understanding that even the smallest of actions can have profound impacts. The bond she had formed with the cub wasn't just about saving a life. It was about realizing that she, too, was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Elisa had returned to the mountains many times after that day, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the wilderness. She often thought about the bear, wondering if their paths would ever cross again. And though she wasn't sure if it was truly the same cub standing in the distance now, the thought filled her with peace. Maybe he remembered her, maybe he didn't. But she knew she would never forget him. The wind rustled through the trees, and as Elisa took one last look at the bear, he turned and disappeared into the forest. She watched him go, feeling a deep sense of closure. It wasn't sadness that filled her. It was contentment, the kind that comes from knowing that some connections, however brief or unlikely, leave an indelible mark on the soul. Elisa turned back toward the trail, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She felt ready for whatever life had in store for her next. The mountains had given her strength when she needed it most, and the memory of the bear cub had become a symbol of her own resilience. No matter where her path led, she would carry that day with her. The day she had saved a life, and in doing so, had found her own strength. As she made her way down the familiar path, she thought about the future. She knew there would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But now, more than ever, she was certain of one thing. No matter how steep the climb, she had the courage to face it. And somewhere, in the vast wilderness, a bear roamed free, just as she did, strong, brave, and unafraid. Their stories, intertwined for a brief moment, would continue on their separate paths, but the bond they had shared would remain. Elisa smiled as she walked, the mountains behind her and the world ahead.